Hi everyone, it's Dan. Welcome back to Poetology. Today we're going to talk about the link between poetry and magic, and I'm going to show you some books that explore that affinity between ritual and poetry and ceremony and spells and the written word. This is great for October, and I hope you enjoy the lead up to Halloween, and that maybe you find some inspiration in these books to start reading more about magic and poetry. The first book I'm going to talk about is Spells, 21st Century Occult Poetry. This one is a fairly recent book. Let me just see the date of publication, 2018. And it has a lot of contemporary poets who have explored magical poetry, and it says at the back that Spells brings together 36 contemporary voices exploring the territory where justice, selfhood, and the imagination meet the transformative power of the occult. These poems unmake the world around them so that it might be remade anew. You will find lots of contemporary poets from the UK, from the US, and from elsewhere. So if you're going to just look at one of the books that I show you today, I think this is the most obvious choice. It might be available in your local library, and a lot of the poets included here have written other poetry collections that also explore similar themes. So it's definitely a great place to start. By the way, the authors of Spells will be having a poetry reading on the 31st of October online. There's a free Zoom event. I'm going to post the link for that in the description below. The second book is one that I found by chance, and I think not as many people have heard about it. It's actually two different anthologies. The first one I discovered is Mandragora, Further Explorations in Esoteric Poesis. And it goes with this other book called Datura, an anthology of esoteric poesis. So I discovered Datura after I came across Mandragora. They both are great together. They're an extension of one another, basically. And what I love is that it really is an effort to explore that link between magic and poetry, both how this played out in the past, but also how it carries over into contemporary lives. And it has a mixture of essays and poems. So you get an essay every few poems, and I just think it's quite a beautiful book. There's a lot in here. It's really, really worth having a look at. And again, it has so many poets who have also written other collections that you could then pursue and look at in more detail, including Paul Holman, whom I will discuss later. Here there's an excerpt from Morgana, and I will show you that book in a second. So yes, I think they are really well worth reading. And it's published by Bibliothèque Rouge, so there's like a fancy, really, really fancy edition, I think for both, and that looks amazing, but it's super, super pricey as well. So if you are on a budget, you have to buy the Bibliothèque Rouge edition. So it's well worth buying these editions. I can't recommend it highly enough if you're interested in this kind of thing. Now, I'd like to show you a very special poetry collection because it's unusual in format. It's Sasha Akhtar's Only Dying Sparkles, and these are poetry cards. So you get a deck like this, illustrated by John Alexander Arnold, and I'll show you. Yeah, you get these amazing cards, and the poetry and the art are both kind of dark and beautiful with like eruptions of light, I would say. Let's draw 3 of them to compose our own little magical poem today. Yeah, I'm going to do this properly. I'm just treated it like a tarot deck right now. Okay, I'll cut it into, here we go. Our first card is this. Our second card is this one. And our third card is here. I'm going to show you a different view of them now so we can read it. I start somewhere else, like the man who shows us the way on trains, like the red-streaked white tulips, the meaning behind meaning behind meaning. The world roars outside in mechanical staccato, spelling my madness. Let us not create desire, remember fulfillment. A sterling expanse of sky, vast, consequential. So I hope you enjoyed that. There are so many ways in which you can integrate these cards into any kind of practice that you have, or just read them in any order, and it can be used in so many different ways. I think I love the idea of a poetry deck like this, and Sasha Akhtar has several books, and it's well worth looking into because all of them are like magical spells, magical invocations. Sasha has written 6 poetry collections. The most well-known is The Grimoire of Grimalkin, and more recently she's published The Whimsy of Dank Juju and of Necessity and Wanting. I really recommend checking them out. Now, I have this beautiful book titled Tara Morgana by Paul Holman, and I love the concept of taking Tara, who is a tantric deity coming from Buddhism, especially, and Morgana, who is more of a pagan, sort of British Isle, probably also France, I don't know, like Celtic deity, and putting them together and trying to follow the trail of this goddess. Now, it's a book that also has a lot of art inside. There are many pictures in black and white, and it creates a really beautiful atmosphere as you read the text with all these mysterious pathways. And again, it's another really interesting way of exploring the magic of everyday life. But I am not so crazy about the treatment of this figure of the goddess, the idea of that the speaker being a man following that goddess. Sometimes it kind of feels a bit stalker-ish, and the way that the goddess is represented is kind of following this goddess slash whore dichotomy in ways that I sometimes found off-putting and a bit troubling, to be honest. So while I loved some of it, I didn't like it as much as I wanted to. But yeah, the way it's written is beautiful. I'm just going to read a couple of lines. A sigil had been drawn upon the gate to the wood in which my tormentor lingered, his head fringed by a mane of discoloured web, his speech a series of numbers. Those who pursue me are slow, so that I will come to love them. And there's a lot more in there. A poet whose collection I do not have here, but who is also included in spells, is CAConrad, who wrote Rituals for Poetry. And in fact, I'm hoping to get a copy myself very soon, because CAConrad, I think, is an amazing poet who really has created rituals that were then incorporated in poetry and explored ways of dealing with grief and memory and just creativity and strangeness in their daily life. So I think that's an amazing collection as well, although I don't have a copy here. I also wanted to show this slightly more problematic book, which is Poetry and Prophecy by Chadwick. And this is an old anthropological study published by Cambridge University Press in 1942. So it does all the anthropological things that are deeply problematic, especially in terms of the representation of indigenous people. There's an idealization, there's exoticization of indigenous people, and also this idea of them being somewhere in the past, you know, drawing a parallel between between contemporary lifestyles of indigenous people and the past of white Western people. One thing that this book does is it looks at anthropological records of many indigenous peoples from all over the world and sees what the link between sacred language is, between poetry and shamanism. And as such, I think it's been very influential and it's often cited in other contemporary works. So it's an important but very problematic book, and I think it's probably quite limited in its scope nowadays, but it was kind of a landmark, I guess, when it came out. Right, so I hope you've enjoyed all the books that I showed you today. There are many others, I am sure, and I would love to hear if you have other books that are part of a similar theme. And it's also something I'd love to explore further later on. At some point, I would also like to interview some poets to talk about their process and the way in which poetry informs their daily life. And I hope I can tell you more about this very soon. In the meantime, I would really love to hear if you have any recommendations, any thoughts about this, or if this video makes you want to get some of the books, whether it's from your library or bookshop or wherever. I would love to know that. And I will be back next week with a new video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't hesitate to like the video or subscribe if you want to hear more from Poetology. See you soon. Bye.